My favorite thing to do in the world is to make quilts, and my favorite part about making quilts is starting new quilts. For the last 2 weeks I have been making a new quilt, and today I'm going to share it with you. I have divided this video into 3 parts. The first part is where I show you the quilt in detail. I will show you each of the individual portraits that I made in this quilt. We'll just get a chance to admire it. The second part is where I show you all of the steps that I took to make this quilt. I'll walk you through the decisions I made and try to explain to you why I made the decisions that I did. Please stick around till the end, because the third part is where I give you ideas about how you can riff on this idea of this portraits quilt and make a quilt of your own or make a project of your own. So let's get started.
Hello everyone, this is Shalina. Welcome to my channel, Quilt and Color, where I talk about all things related to art. Here you can follow me on my journey to becoming a full-time artist.
Today I get to start a whole new quilt. One of the things I was thinking about is the index card portraits that I made earlier, and I thought it'd be really nice to make portraits on fabric. I was looking at some quilting books, and pink was the color that kept getting my attention, and so I found my pink fabrics and I cut them up into 3.5 by 5.5 pieces. so that when they finish, they'll wind up being the same size as the portraits that I've made on the index cards themselves. I wrote a list of the supplies that I might use for this quilt, and let me go over those with you. I used about 16 charm squares, probably 20 would be good. I was just trying to save fabric. Charm squares are 5" by 5" squares that are sold as a collection. Usually when a designer debuts a collection, they offer charm squares as a sample for each of the fabrics in their line. And it's a great way for you to be able to make scrap quilts, is that you can just buy a charm square instead of having to buy lots of different fabric and cutting them up yourselves. The other thing that I use is fusible webbing. I used Wonder Under, but you can use Fast to Fuse, you can use Misty Fuse, you can use Steam Steam 2 Light. The next thing I use is background fabric. You can use one big whole background fabric, but I chose to use a variety of different pink fabrics to make the backgrounds for each of these portraits. You also need batting to put between the layers, and I use Warm and Natural. You also need backing fabric, something to put on the back of the quilt, and also you need border fabric. Also, if you are binding the quilt, then you would need the binding fabric as well. And then you would need your normal things like the sewing machine and needle and thread, things like that. I also used some tulle to secure all of the fusible. You probably don't have to, but some of my fusible did not stay. I had some eyeballs that had fallen off when I took my quilt upstairs to press. And I think part of it may have had to do with the fact that maybe I didn't peel off the fusible correctly, and I peeled off the fusible instead of just the paper. And the other thing is maybe I didn't press the original fabric long enough on the fusible. And then of course I sewed it down, so now the pieces are definitely going to be the way that I place them. So here's the background squares, and you can see the index cards will fit. The portraits will be right on top like that with fabric. So these are the fabrics that I've chosen. For the portraits, for the faces. A lot of teals, and then some darker colors, some purples for some added interest. These are two different charm packs that they have. There's I just wanted to have a variety of the different patterns in the fabric. So these are all different patterns. I'm starting out with a bunch of background fabrics. I don't really know how many I want to make yet, but I'm thinking 20 probably will be a good number to start, because I really like making these, so the more the better. The first thing I'm doing is I am fusing the charm squares onto some Pellon fusible web. This is Pellon 805 Wonder Under. And I'm using a roll rather than sheets of fusible, because there's a lot of charm squares and I wanted to try to fit as many in as possible. So it's basically a matter of putting the charm squares on the fusible and just pressing them down. I put the charm squares as close to each other as possible. I also have silicone sheet that I can use to keep the fusible from getting onto my iron. To just press down and keep it for the required length of time in order for it to stick to the fusible. You can follow the directions on the fusing sheet. And then it's a matter of cutting these out and cutting out the faces. Okay, so now I have a bunch of charm squares that are attached to the fusible. They're not perfect, but that's okay. That's the whole point of quilts like this, is that we don't expect perfection. It's a nice, easy, laid-back project to work on. So what I'm going to do is to take the fabric and just use some children's scissors, which is what I use to cut these apart, And then I'm just going to cut out shapes that look like faces. The important thing for me is to make sure that I stay within the lines. This is a 3.5 inch background square. 3 inches is what I need to do, so I need to make sure that I limit myself to 3 inches. So I'm just going to fold the fabric here at the 3 inch mark, approximately. It doesn't have to be perfect again. And so then I can make sure that I stay on this 3.5 inch part. And I'm just going to cut out a face. I can also just cut out this excess fabric. I can use that for eyes and nose. And then just cut out the face shape out of here. So I'm just going to make a random cut. I'm going to cut out some shoulders, a neck, and then the face. And it's 5 inches, so I'll be fine fitting it into the background fabric. Come back around. Finish off the neck and then cut off the face, the shoulder. So now I have a face shape that will be easy to attach to a background like this. So I'll just go ahead and do the rest of these. And the rest of this leftovers I can use for other things. I can applique it also on the faces, or I can just use it on a different project. But I like using it on the faces. Some of this is kind of peeling off, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect because once we put it on the shape, we're going to press it again. I'm just using the template to cut off the excess part. And that way I have a line to cut from here. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. I think the best part about projects like this is that it is so flexible and improv that, you know, whatever you do, whatever happens, it's not a mistake. It's actually a design, part of the design. Okay, so there's a shoulder, a neck, head, neck, and there's our next person. I'm just going to keep doing the same thing for all the rest of these, and then I will show you the next step. As you can see, I have finished cutting up all of the face and body shapes for all of the people that I'm putting into the quilt. I ran out of some whole fabric, so I'm going to piece together some of these shapes to have the clothing already placed on the person instead of putting it on top. With the extra fabric that I have cut up, I'm going to make the hair and the rest of the clothing, and I'm not worried about running out of fabric because there's still more charm squares available if I do need them. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and press all of these shapes onto the background fabric. This one is a little big. I can trim it a little bit so that it'll fit properly into the quilt when it is put together, because we are going to lose the 1/4 inch seam allowance around all of the edges. I can go ahead and put the bottom of the body all the way to the edge because that'll be put into the seam allowance, or I can put it up a little bit higher so that there's room underneath, but I think probably I'm just going to go ahead and put it all the way down so that it'll be secure into the seam allowance. So that's what it looks like so far. I'm going to go ahead and press all these shapes into the background fabric, and I'll get back with you. Okay, now I've finished peeling off the paper backing from the fusible and have pressed down the faces onto the background fabrics. I just wanted to show you these little pieces that I took out. You have to make sure that you leave the fusible on the fabric and not on the paper. And these are little trimmings that I did just to keep the faces to be the right size for the portraits. And now let me show you the portrait. All of the faces are now pressed onto the background fabric. I didn't worry about which face to put on which background fabric. As a beginning quilter, I agonized about which fabric I should put together with the background fabric. But it turned out that after all the agonizing, I wound up having to put background fabrics next to each other just because background fabrics don't really draw as much attention as the big bright bold colors that are in the front. So I'll decide later how to put the quilt together to make sure there's a good balance of colors. I am going to save every little bit of all of the little scraps that I have here, including all the little cutoffs that I did from the top of the heads, and because I'm going to be using them for the clothing and for the eyes and the nose and the hair and the mouse. And so we'll go ahead and just move on to the next bit. Hello, welcome back. The last time that we talked, we had fused all of the faces onto the background fabric, and I was going to start adding the hair and the clothing. But what I decided to do instead is to add the eyes first. The eyes are the smallest part of the face. When I did the portraits in paint, I did the hair and the clothing first because they were the largest parts. But I'm kind of worried about the eyes because they are so small and fiddly. So I thought that if I did those first, then I could put the hair, I could just put the hair around it. I'm worried that if I put the hair first, it might not have enough room for the eyes, and the eyes may just not look right because you can't put the eyes on top of the hair, but you can always cover up the eyes with the hair. So what I decided to do for the eyes is to have, for the white of the eyes, is to just get a fabric. I found this fabric that's a little bit thicker than the regular fabric. It's more, it's not a canvas, but it's heavier than regular cotton fabric, a little thinner than canvas. And I thought that I could just use these white sections for the eyes. I probably could also use the darker ones, but I probably am not going to. We'll see how it goes. So now I'm just going to cut out the eyes from this fabric. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the rest of the portraits, is to freehand them with the children's scissors. The reason I use children's scissors is because there's a paper backing to the fusible, and I want to not mess up my fabric scissors with cutting paper. So I'll find a white section, and these will be cut really small. So there's one little teeny tiny eye. You can use tweezers if you want to. Oh, I like that. So the way it would look on the portrait, something like this. So I kind of like the size of this. It's a little bit big for the face, but I think it'll still look good. And I can always trim them up later if I need to. So the good thing about using fusible is that until you press it, it's all changeable. So you can put peel off the fusible, you can peel off the paper now, and you can place it on where you want it to be on the portrait, and you can just leave it there, and you can move it around until you like what you see, and then when you like what you see, that's when you press it to finalize it. Until then, you can mix and match, move them around, make them smaller if you want to, make them white, make the eyes wider or closer together, farther apart or closer together. You can just move them however you want to. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do next, is to cut out all the eyes and place them on the portrait. Sorry about the shaky camera, but it's hard to use a tripod on this since there's so many rows of portraits. I now do like the little stars for the eyes. I'm not sure if I'm going to still use the browns, but I think they might still be okay. Yeah, so we'll just keep going, and I'll go ahead and get some more fusible on or more fabric, and then I'll just keep going and see where we go from here. Okay, it's another day, and I just wanted to show you where I am so far on this project. I have fused down all of the fabric that I had told you I was going to fuse earlier. And then I have cut a couple extra pieces like here for the hair. I do have some more fabric that's left over, and I'm going to add those into the project now. Basically what I'm doing is I'm just trying to see what size of the fabric it is, and if it seems to fit better for the clothing, then I'll put it in the clothing. And if it's a little smaller, maybe for the hair. That's one of the things about improv quilting, is that you can keep changing your mind until you're finished with the project. So I'll be back once I choose what to do with these fabrics, and then I will get back with you. The fun thing about improv quilts is that they don't look the way you expect them to. You can't plan ahead what it's going to look like at the end. It's like a complete mystery quilt. So basically you just let it go the way it is. The fabric choices happen the way they happen, and you end up with something that's quite unexpected and not what you were planning on doing. So even though my quilts, my index card portraits on fabric look more like aliens than they do like people, that's something that just happened with the fabric choices that I made and the way I put them together, and that's okay. I think these are fun little portraits, and they're not what I was expecting to get, but I really like how they turned out. When I'm making an improv quilt, one of the decisions that you make is to do the easy thing. So the fabric that's going to fit the best, the color choices, or just whatever it is that you pick up. Sure, you might change your mind about something if it's the wrong size, or if the colors clash, then you can certainly change it. You don't have to do everything exactly, but mostly you're basically just doing the easiest thing. Each step of the way that you're doing is just do the easiest thing, then do the next easiest thing, do the next easiest thing. And over time you're going to come up with a really interesting quilt that's only you can make it. And the fact that it's easy does not make it a bad thing. It's actually doing something that's easy is what makes it look as good as it does, because it's your best, because they fit what works with you and your personality and your fabric choices and your size of fabric. It works best for you because it's you. It represents you and your thought process and your decision-making styles. Hello, I'm back. I just wanted to show you another quick run through what the quilt looks like now. I think I've gotten over the messy part of it, over the hump, and I think it's looking good, and I just need to finish the hairs on these bottom rows, and then I'll be able to put the quilt together. Welcome back yet again. So now I have gone ahead and pressed all of the pieces that I had added, and I added some more while I was at it because I was just having so much fun. So this is what the portraits look like now. I lean into the fact that they look like aliens, so I went ahead and continued with the alien concept, and that just made it so much more fun, because then the shapes, the eyes could be different colors or different shapes, everything. I could just add more characters to the aliens and not worry about, human proportions and things like that. So I'm really happy with the way they look. I had such a fun time adding all these little extra bits and pieces. There's just a little bit of fabric left over. There's hardly any scraps at all. And so now I'm going to go ahead and arrange these to make sure that none of the, I'm going to try, I guess, to arrange them to try to separate out any colors that stand out to me. There's like two darks over here, and there's the lime greens are kind of close to each other. Things like that, just trying to arrange them pleasingly, and then I will put them together, and then I will come back to you. See, there's two pieces that are really close to each other in fabric. Welcome back. I am finished sewing the columns together, pressing them, and then sewing the rows together. This is what the quilt looks like now. One of our people lost her smile, but that's an easy fix. I'll just go ahead and put that on later after I am ready. And then also here I'm still keeping my scraps in case I want to add the smile and any other embellishments I want to add after the fact. Poor little lady. Sad one. I didn't add noses to everybody. I might do that later. I'm not sure. And then I have chosen some fabric like this so that it would wind up being like stripes. But the fabric goes the other way. It's lengthwise and not widthwise. You can see the selvage end is over here. And so it goes this way. And so what I'm thinking now, thinking of making a border instead of a binding. I thought if I could miter the corners, I could make something that kind of looks like a frame. I don't know if you can see that with this picture very well yet, but I thought that would make a nice, something that would look like a frame going around the big portrait. So I'm going to go ahead and press everything now and sandwich the quilt. Do you see how perfectly the backing fits against the top? Well, it's not going to fit once I put on the border, so I'm going to have to piece the backing. This is basically how I decide how big I want the border to look. I put the quilt top on the top right corner of the back of the binding fabric, and then I diagonally move it down, until it looks pleasing to me. It's kind of hard to do one-handed here. I think this looks about right based on the portrait size, a little bit less than that. The border is smaller than the portrait, and what I'm going to do now is just measure this, add ½ an inch for the seam allowance, and then cut this to size. As I'm thinking about quilting this, I know that each of these little eyeballs and each of these little pieces are going to be hard to secure down because they are so tiny. What I've decided to do, just to make sure everything stays in place, is to add a layer of tulle. This tool will make sure that it secures everything, and because it's sheer, it really won't be visible once everything is quilted down. I think I'm going to add the tulle in addition at the same time that I'm adding the border fabric, and that way I can sew in the tulle in here instead of just laying it on top. And then because of that, I want to make sure that I finish off all of the portraits and I'm happy with the way they look, and before I put the tulle on and add the border fabric. So I cut it 3 inches, and I can always trim it smaller if I need to, but I don't think I want it bigger than that. And then this is what it's going to look like with the mitered corner. I think it's going to look pretty good. And because all of these are raw edged, I'm going to go ahead and just raw edge the mitered corner instead of trying to sew it down all fancy. Here I have layered the tulle onto the top, the quilt top, and I pinned it in many places so that it can be flat and not stretched, but still on the quilt top. And then I added the border fabric, pin the border fabric to both sides. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to sew, starting a 1/4 inch in the edge so that I can get the miter in. So I'll start from 1/4 inch down, so all the way down, stop at a 1/4 inch at the bottom of the quilt, and a 1/4 inch before I get to the end, and I'll do that on both sides, and then I'll sew the top borders similarly. Okay, you'll notice that when I added the side borders, I made them go past the edge, and that's because of the miter that's going to happen over here. And because I'm not sewing I'm not going to be sewing these two seams together, I don't have to press yet. I can wait until after all the borders are added before I press. So I'm going to do the same with the top and bottom borders, in that these will also go to the edge. I'm measuring the size to go all the way to the edge of this outside border, going all the way across the quilt top, and then all the way out to the other border. And then what I'm also going to do is add an inch or two, just a little bit of extra, because I can always trim off that extra. I don't really need to make sure that it's the exact same size. So that's what I'll do, is I'll just measure it to be just a little bit bigger than this border, and then I can cut that off and just attach it to the top and the bottom. I also trimmed the tool. I have some extra tool over here that goes beyond the edge of the quilt top. That's just for me, for my security, my peace of mind, I guess. So that what I do is, after I sewed it down, like on this side, I sewed it down. After I sewed the border on, I went ahead and trimmed off the rest of the tool so that it would be, there wouldn't be any excess there. You can see how it's been trimmed off. What I do is, once I've cut out the size that I want, I finger press it in half and line up the halfway point into the halfway point of the quilt top, and that way it's centered. That way it's centered on the quilt. You can see that I folded up the left and right borders so that they're out of the way, so they won't get caught in the seam. I'm going to start stitching a 1/4 inch from the beginning of the top, from the inside of the top, 1/4 inch in, and also a 1/4 inch in here, and that way the borders won't reach each other and won't get all of the, we'll catch the intersection. And this seam ends at the 1/4 inch intersection, and this seam ends at the 1/4 inch intersection. So there will be a square that goes in this way. There'll be an angle that goes this way, so the quilt will be secure. But the edges here of the border will not be sewn into a seam, so that they can be sewn into an angle for the miter corner. Here you can see that I finished sewing off both of the borders, and all 4 of the borders. And so what I'm going to do now is to go ahead and press all of these down on both sides, and then press the corner here into a miter so that I can attach them to each other. And sometimes I'm trying to be careful, and I wind up sewing a little bit less than a 1/4 inch, which is fine, because what I can do once I'm ready for everything is I can go ahead and I'm going to sew all the way down to secure all of the edges. Ta-da! All the pieces are now pressed down and the corners have been mitered. I'm just going to applique this down so I don't have to sew it. But sewing it would be pretty much an easy process. I just want to avoid doing it because I have a quilt that has lots of mitered corners that still have to be done, and I want to get this quilt finished. So here's what it looks like from the top, and then here's what it looks like on the bottom. I already like the way the mitered corners go around the corner. The mitered angles make the little worms go around the corner, or snakes, or whatever that is. And here you can see that I've sewn down the miter on all four corners, and then I'm just going to trim off this excess piece here. I'm going to cut the batting, the backing, and the top to all be the same exact size so that I can birth the quilt. I want to show you here on the backing when I pieced the two pieces for the backing fabric to make sure that it was big enough to fit, is that I left a seam open, part of the seam open here, and then I attached it some fusible to both sides so that I can close up after I birth the quilt, I can close up this section. What this means is that I'll be able to sew all the way around. When I am securing all three of the layers together, I can sew all around all of the edges and not have to leave an edge there. This makes for a much neater closure for the quilt. Sometimes when you leave a seam open in the bottom or side of the quilt, it can show if you're not really careful in securing them correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to birth the quilt through here, and then once that's done, I can just take out the paper from the fusible and fuse it down, and then after I fuse it, then I can just it'll be secure with the quilting. And here I have layered the quilt top and the batting, and I have cut them to size so that they're exactly the same size. And now I'm going to work on the backing so that it will also be the same size. When the quilt is birthed, after we put the hole in, we turn it right side out, then everything will be in the right place. So we're putting the front and the back right sides together, and the batting will be underneath the front. I test this several times before I actually sew it because it's a pain to have to fix it if you do make a mistake. I have pinned all three layers together. The front and the back are right sides together. The batting is on top. It's behind the quilt top, and I'm going to sew it all the way around. I'm going to go sew all three layers together all the way around, and then when I'm finished, I'll be able to go through the opening that I've left here in the backing fabric and turn the quilt right side out. I'm going to use a walking foot for this task. It helps feed all three of the layers evenly into the sewing machine so that it doesn't stretch out of place. Okay, I hope you can see this. Now I have sewn around all of the edges of this quilt, and I'm going to go ahead and birth it. I'm going to turn it inside out. First I'm going to clip off the corners just to have a little bit of less bulk in the corners, being careful not to clip the seams. I did use a little bit larger than a 1/4 inch seam allowance just for security, because I don't want to have this quilt be loose. I want to make sure the seam is secure, and I made the seam allowance a little bit bigger than 1/4 inch just to make sure that all the quilt is secure. Trim off a little bit of the loose threads, and then I'll go ahead and start turning the quilt from the opening that I had left. So I'm just basically taking the backing fabric and turning it out. Not going to be able to see very much of this process, but it's a little interesting to see, especially when you see the quilt coming up. I left some pins inside just to keep the loose pieces secure, and so I'm trying to do more with moving the backing instead of the front, so the front can stay as even as possible. So here it is. Now that it's inside out, I'll just secure the edges here. Poke out the edges to make sure it's square. I'm just using my finger right now. Okay, and so there we have it. Here's the quilt top. I'll even this out a little bit. Make sure the backing is on the back. Okay, I'll pick up the camera so you can see it. So I'll just go ahead and press this so that it's all nice and straight. I'm going to peel off the fusible on the back so I can secure this, and it'll be closed, and then the rest of it will be secure with the quilting stitches. And after I poke out the corners some more and press it, it'll be all nice and flat. Then I'll be able to quilt the quilt. So here's a quilt. It's been turned right side out. All the edges have been properly straightened out, and it has been pressed. You can see the pins are still there because I still need to quilt it. And then on the back, I have secured the opening. It goes from here to here with the fusible. I had to put the fusible on the top so that it would cover up this seam and be right underneath this dark green fabric. It does come up a little bit, and I can fix that with the quilting, so I'm not worried about that. And then over here, I went ahead and attached a fusible with a light color fabric in the shape of a face, in the shape of the portraits that are on the other side, so that I could put my name and address on here as a label. So I could put usually what I do is I put my name, the city and state where I made it, and the date that I finished it. I do have a little bit of thread over here that is underneath the netting. I didn't get it out before I sewed it together, so I'll just pull it out with a needle or a pen, and then I can just cut it off. Another option is to just cut a little bit of the netting of the tool and take the thread out that way. Once I quilt over the tool will still be secure. I was able to pull the threads up out of the tool without cutting into it, and I'm just going to snip these off and then they'll be gone. All gone. All the loose threads are gone. So now it looks the way it's supposed to look, and I'm happy with that. There was one quilt that I made a while ago that had a safety pin that was still stuck in there. I was very careful when I layered these to make sure that all the pins would be on one side and not in a place where I couldn't get to them, but for that one I did have to cut into the fabric a little bit and fix that. But now this one is done, and I will just go ahead and quilt it, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Once I got to the sewing machine, I thought it would be good to be able to secure the layers together in just like a stitch in the ditch. But I'm not really good at stitching in the ditch, so I thought maybe a decorative stitch would be nice. And I found this long one here that doesn't take up a lot of thread, and so I've used this down the column. And I'm going to continue that in all the other columns. So I've sewn all of the columns, quilted all the columns with the decorative stitch, and I decided that for the horizontal seams that I would use a different stitch so that there wouldn't be a big bulk in the center. So I'm using this little wavy line that takes up a little bit less room and isn't quite so attention getting, but it still secures the seams without having to be exactly on the ditch every single time. So I'll go ahead and add the rest of the horizontal stitches, and I'll be back. There it is. That was quick and easy to do the row. So now all of the blocks are secure. That'll keep the quilt from moving too much when I do the free motion quilting. And I've now decided that instead of using the darker thread for the outlining and for the border, I decided to use this lighter color. I think that'll just blend in better than the darker color. After I finished the quilting I was planning on doing with the walking foot, I switched over to the free motion foot so that I can outline all of the portraits. So let's go over how you can riff on this quilt. One of the things that you can do is to go back to painting. This quilt was inspired by the index card portraits that I made. To go back to painting, you can paint your own portraits collection the way I did mine, just only doing it on paper or canvas instead of in fabric. Or you can make the same thing in collage or some other medium, whatever your favorite medium is. One thing, especially if you're a beginner, you could do is to make one big portrait instead of lots of little ones. The 3x5 is a little fiddly, especially for beginners. And so you could either do 4x6 portraits, or if you just do one big like 12x12 portrait, that would just make it so much easier to do on your own. Another one you could do is to play with a child or a bunch of children. So if you could have each child create their own portrait, that way you could have, each child make their own portrait and then put those together in a quilt. Another way you could riff on this quilt is to make it simpler. So for example, you could just have portraits with just eyes or just mouths or just hairstyles. If you had a dentist or a hairstylist, that would be great if you could just make one particular facial feature and not necessarily all of them. That would make it simpler for you. I think a sunglasses quilt would be nice, just to have sunglasses to make it cool shades. Or you could do just eyes only, like somebody's watching you, make it artistic that way. Or smiles only for a dentist. For a more sophisticated look, you can add blenders or batiks and have a more sophisticated color palette than the one that I use. Mine have a lot of patterns, and so they make for a more whimsical look. And you could also go the other way. You make it more representational of the people that you actually know. So you can do a classroom or a family grouping, things like that, so that it represents the actual people and not just random people like I made. Another way you can do it is use your scraps. This is a great way to use up scraps instead of charm squares, and then you'll be able to reduce some of the scraps that you have hanging around. Another way you can riff on this quilt is to make it monochromatic. So if you just have different shades of fabric, then you can get away with using just 2 or 3 fabrics instead of the big variety that I used. Let's just have a discussion about making improv quilts. So when you make a quilt, you can have as much control as you want. You can make sure that each of the pieces are exactly the way you want them to be. But part of the fun of making an improv quilt to me is to let the quilt decide what it wants to do. So it's a balance, right? Because you can choose how much control you want to have on your quilt. For my quilt, the eyes were too big, so I did make them much smaller than they were originally, because I wanted them to be more proportionate to the facial features. But then I stopped. I did not. One of the things I had thought about doing was to go back and look at the facial features that I had and then mix and match them to make sure that the eyes were the same approximate size and shape, to choose which person should have which smile, that sort of thing. But then I decided I was just going to let the people be the way they were. One of the things about making friends is that you accept them the way they are, and you don't say, hey, your eyes are too far apart, or your eyes are too close to each other. Your mouth should be wider or smaller, or whatever you think that should happen. If you're making a quilt, you would want to make that more precise. To me, letting the facial features just be the way that they were cut makes the portraits more interesting, because I think if you are trying to make them more pretty, then they would look more similar to each other based on your value of beauty. Letting the way I cut the fabric and where I place the fabric decide what the portrait was going to look like, I think, I'm allowing my friends to be the way they are. I'm calling this quilt Making Friends, because I made 20 new people and they look exactly the way they want to, and I accept them the way they are.